Hey you guys, what's up? I'm Ashley from heavenathome.org, and this is the Heaven at Home podcast, where my goal is to encourage you in your personal growth journey while being open, honest, and owning my story. We have faith-based conversations and tackle a bunch of different tough topics. Check out the description to follow me and learn more. Remember, you are fully known and deeply loved. Let's do this. So this is part 2. We're here with Aimee Lane, and honestly, we're just gonna talk, and I'm gonna pick her brain, and we will see where this goes. We actually met up for coffee before this interview, and I have to say, even though she's a therapist, I found her to be super down to earth and honest about the fact that she definitely has expertise, but she's also human, which I feel adds incredible value because she's lived through some stuff herself. So Aimee, I was wondering if you could just kind of share like how like a little bit about your own healing journey, because I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. So I think one of the things you mentioned real quick is that as a therapist, like I have expertise, but at the same time, like I'm human. And one of the great things about therapy that I love is like at the end of the day, like yeah, I have a degree, but I'm a human. Like,
yeah.
And therapy is like just two people or however many people in the room sharing their humanity. Mm-hmm. And so like if you're hurting and crying, like chances are like I'm feeling that with you and I want to cry too. Yeah. So like I think that's the beautiful thing about therapy. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this is because people are hurting and we are people who don't like to show that we're hurting, like in general, and so we put up walls. But if we could let down our walls and show, like I'm hurting and this is hard, like isn't that such an easier way to connect with someone versus like putting up a wall and be like, don't talk to me or I'm angry, because a lot of times under that anger is hurt. So anyways, that's an aside. My healing journey, I would kind of say started when I was really, really young. Had some tough stuff going on at home that I didn't feel, I don't know why, but in my mind, you just didn't talk about emotions, and I think that a lot of homes are like that, and I don't think parents set out to do that, but maybe that's just how they were raised, or maybe that's just not something they did. So if you don't see it, and you're not encouraged to do it, then you're probably not going to do it. So I was having a lot of really hard things going on, and I just didn't share that with anyone. And so I was harboring all this tough stuff as a really young kid, just inside. I was keeping it inside. I put up a facade, put up that wall. I was like, I'm fine, I'm tough, I'm good. Like, I don't need to talk about anything. And then when I was like 10 years old, I think, my parents left. They became travel nurses. And they left me at home with my grandparents. They didn't take me with them. And that just further sparked the whatever pain I was feeling that made it worse, because I felt abandoned. I felt hurt. But again, I did not communicate. I had this idea of you don't talk about emotions, you don't show any way you're feeling unless it's good. And so I just kept that inside. I held it. And then as a teenager, I think I hit that I think teenagers, we all go through that like stage where we're like kind of rebellious, or we've got all these emotions and no one understands me, that kind of thing, which is so normal. But if you add those normal teenage feelings on top of a lot of pain that I had felt before my parents left, and then on top of them leaving, like, wow, I was just like, I was a volcano waiting to erupt. And then I did erupt. I had a bunch of different eruptions. And so the people around me were like, whoa, what is going on? And what's crazy is I thought I had it under control, despite the fact that my volcano was like, it was like Pompeii or something. I don't know. It was awful. And so I was, my grandma at the time, she was like, she's so great. She was like, we're taking you to therapy. And I was like, no, like, I do not want to go talk to some stranger. Like, who wants to do that? And they took me to this lady. She was nice, but we didn't click. We didn't mesh. And she tried to do some work with me that I just was not ready for. And as a client, obviously didn't have those skills of communication, so I was like, sure, whatever. And then as soon as she started, it really started putting me back to some of the things that triggered me. And I was not ready for that, so I ran. I was like, I am not doing this. So after that session, I told my grandma, I was like, I'm never going to see her. That lady is freaking... I will never see that lady again. She's crazy. She tried to hypnotize me, like all this stuff. And my grandma was like, what the heck? So thankfully, my grandma did not give up, and she sent me to another place, another counseling center, where my therapist and I, we hit it off. She worked really hard. I don't remember exactly what she did, but she worked really, really hard to build rapport with me and show me that she cared. And to me, looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, she just showed me that she was human and that she cared about me. And that's a lot of the work in counseling, is like, a lot of people come in and they're like, no one cares about me. And like, your therapist like truly does care about you. Obviously there's boundaries in place, and like, I'm not going to go like, you know, hang out with you on the weekend. Keep it professional, but like, we really do care, and that's why we get into this business. So my therapist worked really hard, and she did really good work with me. And one thing I don't think we talked about, that was along for my healing journey, aside from counseling, was Jesus. I grew up in a Christian home, but all the things that were causing me to hurt, I blamed Jesus for. It's like, if God's good, then why would he let these things happen to me? And I was angry. But again, I grew up in a Christian home, went to a Christian school. Like, how can you say, like...
It's so real.
Yeah, how can you say, like, God's good, or you don't believe God is good in all these Christian places? So I was just kind of wrestling with my own anger by myself. Until I ran into a woman who, she's amazing. She's living out her faith. Like I had never seen before. Like, she actually talked the talk and walked the walk, and she met me where I was.
Nice.
It was powerful. She was just like, yeah, I can tell you're angry, and that makes sense. And she spoke truth into me, but we had the relationship to where I could push back and be like, I don't see this. Like, why?
That's
you know?
so nice to just be able to like let your guard down and just say it how it is,
which
without filter.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
Which is why I think therapy is great for everyone, because a lot of people don't have the person I had. Like, they don't have that person who's like gonna accept whatever they say no matter what. And the therapist is gonna be like, you can say anything. Like, nothing is off limits. Even though where I work is a Christian place, like, I've got people coming in and they're like, I grew up in a Christian home and I don't know if I believe in this. And it's like, yeah, like, same. Like, well, I do believe in Jesus. But, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's okay. You need to talk through those doubts. That's normal. Let's talk through them. Let's work through them. It's okay. Like, nothing's off limits.
Yeah, that's really good. Something about, like, first off, your grandmother. Like, I love that she got you into counseling. I don't know if this is just my family or, like, Hispanic culture or something, but I know, like, just within my family, everything's, like, kind of hush-hush. Like, if something's wrong, if in any arena, mentally, emotionally, if there's problems at home or anything, like, you do not talk about it. Like, everything is very private. So I'm just, like, kind of, I'm glad, like, that sounds almost surprising for someone like me. Like, wow, like, someone's family member actually recommended therapy. So I had two other questions. One, because I feel like I'm hearing a lot about it on TikTok. I'm on TikTok often. Is trauma, like, is that actually more common than people think, or do you think it's becoming like a blanket thing? I'm not really sure.
That's such a good question. So it's so good. I'm gonna kind of go off. So interrupt me as needed. TikTok, it's so good that, first of all, I love TikTok. Also, it's so good that we're having conversations about therapy or mental health, where we're talking to, like, the platform is primarily for teens. I think there's adults on there too, obviously, but it's primarily for, like, it's a teen app, and we're talking about mental health and, like, why it matters. And I love that that's happening, because we're raising up a generation of people who aren't going to suffer in silence. That's going to be powerful. So I love that we're having these conversations. However, TikTok is not a diagnostic tool. If you see something on TikTok and you're like, oh, those are symptoms of ADHD, and I think I might have ADHD, okay, great. We can talk about it, but please, like, take it with a grain of salt, because first of all, everyone's different. TikTok is not the DSM-5. The DSM-5 is flawed, but so is TikTok. So, like, talk to a professional, talk to a doctor, talk to someone who can, like, get you assessed for these actual symptoms and help you understand, like, what's truly going on for you. Now, you really asked about trauma. Trauma is hard to define, because what's gonna impact you is maybe not gonna impact me. Like, we could go through the same experience and you're gonna walk out of that fine, and I'm gonna walk out of that traumatized. And so, was it trauma? For me, yeah. For you, maybe not. And that's very independent upon the person. That's dependent. That's dependent upon the person. That's dependent upon their perspective. That's dependent upon their history. All of these things. So when a client will sit down and they'll tell me something, and they're like exhibiting like symptoms of anxiety, or like they're like, I don't know why this was so like bothersome to me, it shouldn't be. First of all, I'm gonna get rid of that word should, because should elicits, like, after it is a judgment of, I shouldn't feel this way. Well, that's really no good saying that, because you do. So we just might as well not say it, because you do feel that way, and there's nothing wrong with feeling that way. So if you're traumatized by something, not a problem. Well, I mean, I guess it is a problem, but, like, it's okay to feel traumatized by something that maybe somebody else wasn't traumatized by.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. There's a conversation about big T trauma and little t trauma, and I think I even use that term. But I would just say, be honest with how you're feeling, and it's okay if it didn't impact somebody else the same way.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then another thing I was wondering about is, which you kind of briefly touched on it. What kind of advice would you have for someone who feels ashamed about, like, how they think or how they feel or how they reacted? How should they work through that? Or how could they work through that?
I think a lot of things, one thing that makes therapy kind of like threatening for people is that they feel like they have to talk about the things that they're ashamed of. And before you jump into, like, let me tell you what I'm ashamed of, tell me that you're feeling ashamed. Or tell your therapist that you're afraid, or tell your therapist, like, I have these things I want to talk about, or I had this reaction that I don't want to tell you about yet, but I'm feeling ashamed. Like, say that. Like, tell me what's the emotion is for you, and maybe we can talk about why you're feeling ashamed. You don't even have to tell me what the thing was or your response or what led you to feel ashamed, but maybe, like, why, help me understand the shame around this. And a lot of times, like, we're ashamed of things because we think we could have done something differently, or we should have done something differently. There's that word should again. And in reality, like, I believe this. I don't know if all therapists do, but I try to believe that we're all just doing the best we can with the tools that we've been given. So you might have reacted to something in maybe not the greatest or most helpful way, but at the time, that's all you knew. And there's grace for that. It's okay. Like, you know what? Like, that's all you knew. Have some grace for yourself. Or, like, maybe you did something, like, that you're really ashamed of, and that's okay. We can face that shame together. You won't be alone with it. Because the truth is, we do things that we are ashamed of. If you're a Christian, we sin, knowingly sin. And we want to hide, like Eve, right? But God called Eve out of the bushes. God called Adam and Eve out to face what they've done. And there's redemption at the end of that. And so, like, be understanding, show yourself grace, but also know that you're not going in it alone.
Really good. You mentioned, I think it was in your description on the website, a little bit about wholeness.
Yeah.
And I'd really love to hear how you define that term.
Wholeness. It's such a hard question. I remember our conversation about it, and I was like, man, I really wish I remember what I said, because I thought it was good too. I was like, oh, that's great. But if I can remember it correctly, I think wholeness is not necessarily where everything is complete, because we won't be complete this side of heaven. But wholeness is more about a balance of, like, let's say, oh man, I might be going on. But so as a counselor, I go in with a biopsychosocial spiritual approach. So that's really big words, but basically I have a holistic mindset when I'm seeing someone. I'm looking at their biology, their psychology, their social aspect of their life, and their spiritual element. So I'm looking at like all the big things, and I'm trying to hit on where is one lacking? Mm-hmm. Is there one that's getting more attention than the other? And can we build these or develop them to be balanced? Mm-hmm. And so wholeness, I wouldn't say it's like everything is complete, but we're starting to work towards balance of like you're aware of this area, or maybe you have a weakness in this area, and so you are aware to address that or pay more attention to it in the future. Mm-hmm. That's kind of how I see wholeness. It's a journey. It's not a destination. It will be when we get to heaven, but like this side of heaven, it's a journey.
Yeah. Okay, next question. What advice can you give to people to help them understand themselves?
Journal.
Journal.
I love journaling. I love journaling so much, but a lot of people don't like it. So if you don't like journaling, I'm sorry. You're missing out. Journal is great.
I love journaling.
Yeah, it's the best. But the other thing I would say is reach out to a friend. If you have like friends, or like maybe you're close to a family member, like our families or the people who are closest to us can see patterns in us sometimes before we can. So I know for me, my husband is like, here we go again. Like, here's somebody who has made you upset, and it's the same thing over and over and over again. Yeah. He knows my pattern, and he can speak that into me through love, and so I can hear it. But if you're maybe not married, and maybe you have a best friend, or maybe you have like a mom or dad, they see your responses to things, like they'll be able to point out things to you that maybe you can't see. And so I would say if you're ready to receive it, ask to hear it. But the other thing is, I would say look for patterns in your life.
That's really good.
Yeah.
I had just thought of a question while you were talking. So in part 1, and maybe also this part also, we talked a little bit about emotional triggers, and we also talked about trauma to an extent. I'm wondering if you have advice for people who may have found that a person is a trigger for them, like maybe like in conversations with that person cause anxiety, or encountering someone like immediately makes them super angry. What kind of advice would you give someone to kind of do some internal healing?
Yeah, I think that's a hard question. It's a good question, but it's hard because like we have discernment, right? So we like as Christians, like we can kind of get, for lack of a better way to put this, we have like vibes, like when someone's giving us bad vibes or whatever, we're like, ooh, something's not right, or maybe it's like a check in the spirit, right? Whatever. But we don't want to go around judging people, like, you got to check in the spirit, like, we don't want to do that. But if you're around somebody and you're like getting triggered, and it's the same person each time, or maybe you guys had a conversation and that really triggered you, like, this is why I love journaling. Like, go back to your journal. If you're not in counseling, like, go back to your journal and really like write out that process. When did you start to feel triggered? Was it before the conversation? Was it during? Did they say something? Maybe it was how they said it. Like, really just analyze, if you can, like, what is going on. But I think as people, like, it's hard for us, like, if I'm triggered in that situation, it's hard for me to analyze it outside of my emotions, right? Which is why I would encourage, like, take that to somebody, take that to a therapist, take that to a counselor, because they can kind of talk you through those steps of like, okay, well, you were feeling this, that must have been really hard. When did you notice that feeling pop up for you, right? And so take it to your therapist. We can explore it together.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so what advice do you have for spouses who are partners to someone who's experienced trauma? Like, what are some good ways that person can be understanding, or kind of walk them through some stuff?
Yeah. So, I don't know, I'm having a hard time with it.
Yeah, you're good.
If you are someone who's experienced something that triggers you, and it triggers an emotional reaction, and you're on your healing journey, or maybe you're on the you're in counseling and like you're noticing these things pop up, but you really haven't gotten to like the point where you've worked through it yet, like you're probably gonna get triggered around your spouse and they're gonna see it. And so my suggestion for the spouse is like, if you can communicate, tell them what you're feeling, tell them what you're seeing, offer them like a, hey, I'm noticing this, I love you, I want to understand what's going on for you, if you feel comfortable sharing. As only if you want to hear that, right? If you're not in the emotional capacity to hear that or like be that support for your spouse, there's nothing wrong with that, but don't offer that, obviously, if you're not in that capacity. And then listen to hear, listen to understand, but don't listen to respond. There's a different way. And so I know like when I'm struggling, like my husband knows, like, do you want me to listen or do you want me to like give you advice? And most of the time I just want him to listen. And then after I felt heard, then I can ask for, what do you think? And that's really helpful. And then for spouses, I think on both ends, like set up boundaries. Like boundaries in marriage are a beautiful thing. And we need to have them. And so like a boundary could be like, hey, are you in the emotional space to hear this right now? And like there's nothing wrong for if my husband's like, hey, I'm in the middle of something, I really can't give you the attention that I want to give me like 15 minutes. Or maybe he's going through something and like he really can't take on what I'm going through. He's like, no, like I can't do that right now. And it doesn't mean that you don't love your spouse. It just means that like we need to be healthy versions of ourselves so that we can be there for each other. And if he's working through something or if I'm working through something and I can't take that on, like let's work through it and then we can come back together.
Yeah. I think because I know personally, like that's something that I experienced that I'm not so sure I was aware of. Like if you are someone who's kind of had some trauma in the past, I think a lot of times we kind of just have a habit of confiding and there's nothing wrong, or like venting. But I think sometimes stuff really just gets too heavy, like too heavy for you. You try to put it on somebody else and then it's a lot on them also. So like I think it's like everything you said is like a good way to preserve each person and kind of like bring some intentionality on both ends.
The other thing I would speak to is the idea that like, I don't know, like when let's say you've got this really heavy thing you've been carrying and you want to talk to your spouse about it, and like a lot of times like you'll tell somebody something really vulnerable and they won't hold that well, or they won't respond well. Maybe they didn't respond in the way that you thought they would, or maybe their response hurt you, maybe they didn't know what to say. And like I think as the spouse who is on the receiving end of what you're sharing, like it's okay to say like, I really don't know what to say, because they're human. Like I mean, people sit in here and I'm like, oh my gosh, like what do I do? Like this is heavy, right? Like, and that's okay because we're human. So at the end of the day, like communicate, like I want to be there, like I want to share this with you. I'm worried about how you're going to respond. And as the person who is given the information, like maybe you can ask specifically for what you need. And if you don't know and your spouse responds unintentionally in a way that hurts you, you can communicate that too, of like, you know, with grace, like, hey, I don't think you meant this, but this kind of hurt and I'm curious what's going on for you. So you guys can have a conversation, because marriage is like beautiful, but it's also like you're two people who are like human and like we fail each other all the time. And so like finding the grace in that, even with your heavy stuff, like you have to do that.
I think back, and I'm just gonna add this final tip also. If you can't handle it and your spouse can't handle it, I feel like that's a awesome opportunity, number one, to think about therapy, but also to just invite Jesus into that area. You're like, hey babe, like I care about you, I'm trying to be there for you as best I can, but this is too much for me. Like, can we give it to Jesus? Like, can we let him, you know, take control over this area, or like walk us through this process? Okay, ooh, two really awesome things that you mentioned when we were talking over coffee. I already forgot what the HALT method is.
Oh, great.
So can you talk to us about that? What is the HALT method?
Yeah, that's a great segue into when we're talking about marriage and relationships. So HALT method, I love this so much. Okay, HALT is an acronym, and it stands for hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. If you are hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, you need to halt. Stop. Do not continue in a hard conversation. Make a big decision. If you're having an argument, halt it, because if most of those are like physical or emotional needs that need to be met. And so like that's where we get the idea of hangry from. Like I don't know if you've ever come home and you've just been so hangry, and like I know for me, like I've come home, haven't eaten all day, I am hangry, and my husband is like talking to me and I like want to snap like so fast, and he's so gracious, he's like, I think someone needs to eat, and I'm like, yes, I need to eat, like don't talk to me. Like we worked on it. But like those are times where you like want to stop, get your needs met, and then come back together and like, all right, I am no longer hungry, so I can actually have a good conversation. Lonely is a big one. That's a hard one to meet immediately. So connecting, like if you can, like one of the things my husband and I do is we hug. Like I know that sounds kind of silly.
No, it doesn't.
But like
Hugs are great.
like when we have hard conversations, we try to be touching each other. Again, it's actually really helpful. Like maybe we're holding hands or maybe we're hugging, and it like reminds me that we're on the same team and we are emotionally connected. So I'm not lonely, right? It's beautiful, and so that makes having hard conversations a lot easier because I'm not acting out of insecurity or I'm not speaking out of a place of pain. Now it's not foolproof, but it is helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, that reminded me of another question, but okay, kind of in marriage, but also in general. What advice would you have for someone who wants someone else to change?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Well, if you're in therapy and you come and you're like, hey, like, I really don't like how this person responds to me or talks to me, like, my first thing is going to be like, wow, I'm so sorry, that's hard. But also, like, obviously empathy, but also, like, well, what'd you say to them? Like, have you communicated that to them? And a lot of people are always like, no. And, like, I get that because we hate communication, like, we hate conflict. But that's my first piece is, like, if you feel like you have the skills, you can communicate. But at the same time, if you're in therapy, like, it's really not about them. It's about you. What is that response? What is their response triggering for you? What is it bringing up for you? Because the work of therapy is, a lot of people come in and they're like, I want this person to change. And, like, in my mind, I'm like, yeah, it'd be great if they could change, but we can't make other people change. The only thing we can do is you can change. And, like, as soon as you're ready to do that, like, your world's going to get a whole lot better. Because, like, we have, what is it? That there's a scripture that's like, it's about the speck in the other person's eye, but you don't see the log in yours. It's kind of like that, but like very like kind in therapy. Like,
yeah.
I'm not gonna be like, oh, you got a log in your eye. No, but it's just like, where can we grow here, and how can we help you get through this without making that person change? Because if you want that person to change, like, you're in the wrong place.
Okay, this is also good, but I just have, I think, one final question. Communication gaps. Do you feel like there are multiple layers to that? Like, because I know it's simply about like people thinking differently, experiencing things differently emotionally. Do you think there's any layer of that might come from some underlying motive or emotion? Like, I don't know how else to word it.
Okay. I may need you to clarify.
Yeah.
Communication gaps, like when people aren't communicating, right?
When they are communicating, but it's not...
They're not, like, understanding each other?
Yes.
It's complicated. I think that there are times where you're saying you're trying to communicate clearly and the other person just isn't getting it. And maybe they're not thinking the same way. Maybe they're feeling something completely different. Maybe they're not in the space to hear. or what you're saying triggers something for them. And so they're like, that can't be true. I'm going to like fight you on this. Like, like, I don't know if that's what you're asking. Yeah. I think that can also be true. And I think on that note, like, this will be an example, and I don't know if this fits. So in marriage counseling, we talk a lot about the idea of adult attachment. And so when you are, I want to say, like, negatively attached to your partner, or maybe you have a maladaptive attachment style, in marriage, there's typically one of two. One spouse, if they have a maladaptive attachment pattern, they will be a withdrawer. So they, in arguments, they're going to withdraw. They're going to stonewall. They're going to shut down. They're not going to have a conversation. They're going to try to get as much space from you as possible. Then you've got the other maladaptive attachment pattern who they're going to be the pursuer. They're going to pursue. They're going to be like, let's talk about this. I want to spend time with you. And both of them are causing, like, they're miscommunicating, right? Because one wants more time, the other one wants more space, which leads the one who wants more time hurt, and the one who wants more space hurt, and it feels like choked, right? So that's that communication. And what's happening is when we talk about attachment, that traces back to your attachment to your primary caregivers, like up until like age 3. That's when your attachment is really developed. Wow. So we look at that's a bigger picture, I guess, of why that miscommunication might be happening is attachment patterns. And we can really process, like, what's going on for each person. What was your relationship like with your family or your mom or dad, whoever was your primary caregiver? What did you learn from that? And really bring understanding to the table, so that way we can change how they have conflict. And both partners can walk away feeling more connected. But it's hard work.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I tried to ask like a bunch like questions that like normal everyday people would ask. So that's really good. It was awesome picking your brain. Thank you guys so much for listening. Feel free to DM me to send me your feedback. Check out the description below to follow me on social media. This podcast is listener supported. Don't forget to subscribe. Remember, you are fully known and deeply loved. I'll see you in the next one.